Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to Coffee and Current Events, and today I have another mapping update for you. We're going to be discussing the Eastern Front in Ukraine and largely the Battle of Bakhmut. As we well know, the Battle of Bakhmut has been raging for a while, and it seems as if every single day that passes, more and more claims come from this intense battle. The Russians claim they've controlled one part of Bakhmut, and then the Ukrainians claim they've launched some kind of counteroffensive. However, we do have reports from the Wagner Group, and the Wagner Group is now claiming that they control 90% of Bakhmut. In other words, they're claiming the Ukrainians only have 10% of the city under their control. I don't know how true that is. I would take every single thing either side says with a grain of salt, especially Wagner, because Wagner has made many statements that didn't come out to be true. However, according to confirmed reports, the Russians do control 75 to 80% of the city, so it is very possible that by now they control 90% of Bakhmut. So in other words, Bakhmut has essentially fallen, and unless the Ukrainians launch some kind of major offensive to drive the Russians back, Bakhmut will likely fall within the next 2 weeks. The Russians are in a rush to take Bakhmut before Ukraine's upcoming counteroffensive. The Russians want to take Bakhmut, that way they can secure their flanks. Right now, there are thousands of Wagner fighters focused on capturing the city of Bakhmut, and this prevents them from being able to defend the Russian flanks all throughout this entire area, leaving these flanks highly vulnerable to potential Ukrainian offensives. However, if the Russians are able to capture Bakhmut before the Ukrainian counteroffensive, these thousands of Wagner fighters can be relieved to go into defensive positions and protect the line against a Ukrainian offensive. With this being the case, Ukraine is likely trying to launch their offensive way before Wagner controls all Bakhmut. That way they can catch the Russians in a bad position, and that's why I think Ukraine is consistently doing their best to hold this city. To the south of Bakhmut, Russian forces have got increasingly closer to Ivanivsky. In fact, they seem to control this portion of the road. As you can see, the Ivanivsky road goes down here to here, and then it looks as if it splits off right there. So if the Russians can take control of Korsun-Soko Street or Chaikov-Soko Street, they can block off the Ivanivsky road. As I said previously, I think the Russians are practicing a deep battle doctrine, and where they're attacking from different axes, different times, with some of their active forces while leaving a large percentage in reserve. And then once one of the axes shows weakness or breaks, they rush the reserves in, and that's why it can seem as if sometimes the Russians make these sudden gains all around the city. After the Russians capture Bakhmut, it is likely that they will pursue offensive operations elsewhere. Where, no one knows for sure, but we can certainly speculate. Many people have suspected that Russian forces will then attack Chasiv Yar, this city right here. I personally think the Russians are very likely to launch an offensive through Bilohorivka and utilize forces from the Savato-Kremenna line to drive through Bilohorivka and Serebryanka. If the Russian forces can take these two cities, they will move their forces closer to Siversk. At the same time, from Soledar, they can attack Peryzheny and drive north to Zavanivka. If Serebryanka, Bilohorivka, Zavanivka, and Peryzheny are captured, Siversk will be almost surrounded, and they could force the Ukrainians to withdraw, giving them a huge chunk of territory. If they don't pursue that route, the Russians may shoot straight for Slavyansk by going through Minkivka and following this route with an attempt to drive straight forward to Slavyansk. I think those two places are the most likely options for Russian offensive. Keep in mind the Ukrainians are also planning to launch their own offensive around this area. In fact, according to Russian sources, Ukraine has about 80,000 soldiers around Bakhmut. And these forces aren't just sitting there for nothing. They're highly likely to participate in an offensive. This upcoming Ukrainian counteroffensive will be huge, and a large percentage of it will likely take place near Bakhmut. I think the Ukrainians will try to attack Soledar, sweep the Russians here, and form some kind of pincer maneuver to drive the Russians from Bakhmut and liberate the city. I think Russian forces in the Bakhmut region may be vulnerable to Ukrainian counteroffensive. If you look along the Savato-Kremenna line, Russia has a lot of units stationed around this area, especially in the area where they're launching offensive operations. As you can see, they have many airborne assault regiments from the 76th Division over here. They also have members from the 98th Airborne Division, 488th Rifle Regiment, 144th Guards Motor Rifle Division, 56th Air Assault Regiment, 108th Air Assault Regiment, and many more units all throughout this area. This concentration of units is due to the fact that Russians are launching offensive operations near this area. But even if you go through the Savato-Kremenna line, you still see a large concentration of Russian forces all along this area. But if we zoom to the Bakhmut area, Russian forces could be in trouble. As you can see, Wagner is spearheading the assault on Bakhmut, and you have the 57th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade here, along with the members from the 98th Airborne Division and the 137th Guards Airborne Regiment, plus the 51st Guards Airborne Regiment from the 106th Airborne Division. These forces are likely guarding Wagner's southern flanks against a potential Ukrainian counteroffensive. But if we go to the northern flank of Bakhmut near Soledar, Russian forces could be in trouble. As you can see, the Russian units north to Bakhmut are not the best units to have. The first unit we see right here is a 6th Separate Motorized Rifle Regiment from the so-called Luhansk Luhansk People's Republic. The Russian separatists from the rebel provinces of Ukraine have notoriously taken heavy casualties. In fact, reports suggest that guys from these rebel regiments were the same guys guarding Kharkiv when the Ukrainians launched their infamous Kharkiv counteroffensive, which drove the Russians practically out of the entirety of the Kharkiv Oblast. They do have the 123rd Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade here as well, along with the 4th Separate Rifle Brigade and the 3rd Motorized Rifle Battalion. However, if I was the Russian forces, I would replace any LNR/DNR unit standing at any of the flanks. As you can see here, they have the 14th Territorial Defense Battalion, known as Prizrak, from the LPR. These units are probably not the best units to have guarding your flanks in the wake of a potential Ukrainian offensive. Now, down in Avdiivka, the Russians seem determined to take the city of Avdiivka. They're putting a lot of forces near this region. I think the reason the Russians launched their offensive near Avdiivka was to create some kind of buffer from the city of Donetsk. The city of Donetsk is the capital of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. And with the fact that the Ukrainians are planning a counteroffensive to create some kind of buffer in which they could strengthen their defenses to protect the city of Donetsk. If the Russians lost Donetsk, it would create a hole in their front line and could possibly open a front for the Ukrainians to shoot south of Donetsk into Zaporozhye, and then from Zaporozhye into Kherson, and then from Kherson into Crimea. The Russians seem to have noticed this, and that's why I think they're attacking Avdiivka, and I think they're going to do everything they can to take that city. So I wouldn't expect any permanent Russian withdrawals from Avdiivka. I think the Ukrainians see the fact that the Russians want this city to create it as a buffer region to Donetsk. I think the Ukrainians are trying to keep it. So we can possibly expect another battle of Bakhmut to happen near Avdiivka. That's all we have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to this channel that way you're not missing out on any updates we have coming at you. Share this video with a friend. God bless you, and I'll catch you next time.